Thank you all very much for what has been the most extraordinary, powerful testimony and prescriptions for us to take back and directives. And thank you for giving us the strength and the resolve to help to make these changes with you. We can't do it without you, and I think you know that we hope that you know that we are with you in trying to make these changes. We are now going to move to questions. I will just say this. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Mike Thompson, to introduce a member who is one of his vice chairs on the Prevention of Violence Committee. I want to, we're going to have a 1-minute question, and that's going to be true when we get to dealing with our members. Mr. Thompson of California.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It gives me great pleasure to introduce one of the vice chairs on the task force to prevent gun violence, someone who's on the Judiciary Committee, an expert in juvenile justice, and next week he'll be holding a hearing with Grace Napolitano, our colleague from California, on juvenile justice and mental health issues, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Bobby Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Leader, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to point out that we've already had recommendations from the President and Vice President. We'll have additional recommendations, and so we know that we're going to have a serious response to the tragedy in Newtown. But in addition to the recommendations that we already have on gun safety and gun violence specifically, we also have to make recommendations to address violence generally, and that must be done with a comprehensive approach. Dr. Dewey Cornell, who is a forensic psychologist at the University of Virginia, frequently reminds us that if your school shooting prevention plan begins when the shooter is at the door, it's too late. And so the Youth Promise Act is one initiative which seeks to replace what the Children's Defense Fund calls the cradle-to-prison pipeline with a cradle-to-college and career pipeline. The Attorney General's Blue Ribbon Commission report on how to reduce problems associated with children exposed to violence was published only a few months ago. It focuses on prevention and early intervention and uses the phrase evidence-based on virtually every page. It urges us to follow evidence and research and to avoid slogans and feel-good approaches that are not effective. And so if we do what we know what to do and agree that our recommendations will conform to evidence-based approaches and sound research, we can have confidence that our recommendations will make a difference and that our children across the nation will be protected. And we have people from Virginia Tech that I'd like to recognize. Lori and the others who want to stand up, those who are associated with the Virginia Tech tragedy too. Lori. Others.
Thank you. What we're now going to do is, first of all, this has really been an outpouring of member support for this effort. We've had over 60 members of the House of Representatives here, and we are not in session. There are no votes, so the members have stayed because of their view of the importance of this issue and wanting to listen to your views. This is how we're going to handle the questions, because there are so many. What we will continue to do is, as we have in the past, is recognize members in the order that they come in to the hearing room. But we are going to ask members in batches of 5 to ask one question each. I will admonish my colleagues, you have 1 minute, and you're used to this, to ask your question, and then we will have the panel answer those. And honestly, what we'd like to do is to do this in a 10-minute block of time so that we can get around to as many questions as we can. The first grouping of questions are, yes, Madam.
If I just may, I want to join you in saluting the panel. Today it was called a call to action, and you certainly have heralded that call. I know that the mayor has to get back to work in Philadelphia. We're honored by the presence of all of you. But, Mr. Mayor, if you have to slip out, we understand that you have to get there. And I want to thank you now, since we won't be able to acknowledge you at the end. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Leader.
I'm going to ask the following 5 members to kick it off. That's Congressman Eddie Bernice Johnson of Texas, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. Is Joyce? She's gone. Representative Holt from New Jersey, Representative Frankel from Florida, Representative Velasquez from New York, Representative Bonamici from Oregon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. My question probably is a very broad one and widespread, and probably directed to the mayor and the chief of police. With all of the budgetary restraints that we suffer throughout this country, and certainly here, do you think that you could have an effective program without federal funding?
No.
We're going to take all 5 questions at one time. Okay.
Who's the next
I don't
question?
have this. Mr. Holt.
Thank you for the stories. They certainly make one cry, but they should make one angry and outraged and determined and committed. Why is America so different in the statistics that you gave us, Mayor Nutter? You know, it's not that we have so much more mental illness or less mental health care than other countries, or so many fewer armed police, or so many more defenseless students, or it's not only American youth who play violent video games. It's not that we have so little information about bad guys, and yet we have so many more gun deaths. What are the major distractions in these arguments that we have to guard ourselves against? Because clearly, over the decades, we've been distracted from actually confronting the problem.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, panelists, for your moving testimony. My home state of Oregon is one of the few states that actually requires universal background checks for all firearm sales. However, the recent shooting at the Clackamas Town Center shopping mall, the shooter killed 2 before turning the gun on himself. He had stolen his assault rifle. And as we know, the Newtown shooter used weapons that were owned by his mother. So background checks, universal background checks are important, but what other steps can we take? How else can we address the situations that are not addressed by universal background checks? Thank you.
Mr. Moran. Thank you. Oh, I forgot I'll get him next. Okay, he's in the 5.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Had an armed guard, Columbine High School, and we had an entire police force at Virginia Tech. But what I would like to principally focus on, and I'll direct this to Mayor Nutter, being from Virginia. Invariably, the NRA says, points out Philadelphia and D.C. and other major cities, saying they have the toughest gun laws, but look at all the gun crime. Virginia is one of the major problems, because what happens, even though Governor Wilder passed a law limiting handguns to 1 gun a month, they then reversed it, the Virginia legislature. And so now people will go in, and whether it's a gun show or whatever, oftentimes with straw purchases, buy cases of guns, transport them up 95, and then find a convenient urban street corner, open up the trunk, and sell the guns. So I'd like the mayor to address that phenomenon and why it demands federal legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Kildee, 1 minute, and then I am going to ask the mayor to answer your question first, because he's going to have to leave. Mr. Kildee.
Thank you. Panel, thank you for your presence here and your testimony. I represent Flint, Michigan, where over the last few years, 1 in every 540 residents have been slain. An amazing statistic. I talked to our prosecutor today. His concern is that the guns that he sees on the street are held by teenagers, not a single one of them acquired legally. And my question, and I suppose, Chief Knight, I would ask you specifically to comment on what federal support local police chiefs, particularly places like Flint and Saginaw that I represent that have precious few local resources available, what federal support would be most helpful in dealing with this problem?
Mayor Nutter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to be really quick. And again, Leader Pelosi and the two chairs, thank you for your accommodation with regard to my schedule and the opportunity. Congresswoman Johnson, you asked a question with regard to can we really, we do what we do with what we have. But let me say this, and as a part of my testimony, I talked about dealing with these issues at the federal level. In the aftermath of 9/11, the United States of America said, we will do whatever it takes to make sure that we are safe flying.
You're fine.
What I want is someone to say, we're going to do whatever it takes walking. I want to be safe in my neighborhood. I want my children to be able to go to school. I want the same comparable response to international terrorism, to the daily domestic terrorism that I see and other mayors all across the country experience on a regular basis. That's funding, that's personnel, that's equipment, that's support, it's technology, it's a focus on a regular basis. Domestic terrorism is as important as international terrorism. You almost have to take all your clothes off to get on an airplane. One guy had a bomb in his shoe, and now all of us, years later, are still taking our shoes off. That's fine. I want to be safe on an airplane. I'd like to be safe walking in my neighborhood as well, and all of our children. So we can't do what we need to do without serious, focused federal support. And that's what the commission idea is about, because we had a 9/11 commission that told us what we needed to be doing to be safe in the air. We also need that same kind of response to be safe on the ground. So that's the one answer. Congressman Holt, to your question, and I think one of the reasons, I do not believe that Americans are that much more prone to violence. I don't think that Philadelphians are that much more murderous than many other folks. When you have almost as many guns as you have people in this country, invariably, they end up in the hands of folks who should not have them. We tried to pass in Philadelphia. We did get this one by. The simple idea that you had to report your weapon lost or stolen. If you want to make a claim to your insurance company about your car, you have to report it stolen. The NRA fought that, sued me on my 100th day in office as mayor back in 2008, one of the proudest moments of my entire political career. So it is a distraction, and the distraction is the NRA and their money and their intimidating tactics. We have to be prepared to fight back in many of the similar ways, not what I talked about earlier in terms of the disgusting ad. They have gutted and done their best to gut and underfund through Congress, the ATFE, not confirmed a director, taken away their ability to accumulate information for law enforcement purposes. If you're going to solve a problem, you need to know what problem you're trying to solve, and you need data and information. They have taken every possible step to block that agency or the CDC or anyone else. We can put a person on the moon, but I can't assure that you're going to be safe walking around the corner. We need data and information. Gun locks and lockers. Congresswoman Bonamici. In Connecticut, the person took his mother's weapons. One of the proposals out of what I released yesterday in Philadelphia, the Sandy Hook Principles. When you walk into, I don't want to give anyone free advertising, you walk into a video store or an electronics store, you buy a DVD player, they immediately offer you the 2-year warranty. When you walk into a gun store, after the background check, which everyone should go through, they should also offer you a gun lock. Or ask, do you have a gun locker in your house or your business where this gun is going to be stored? And that should be a part of the sale. And that's the only person who should be able to get access to that weapon. We know that the technology exists, that you can, in fact, make guns in such a way that only the legitimate owner and operator can operate that weapon. That would cut down tremendously on the fact that in my city and many other cities across the United States of America, you can rent guns in stash houses across the city. You walk in, they show you an array of weapons, you pick out the one you want, you put your money down, I'll bring it back in a week, you do whatever it is that you do, and you bring it back. Mostly you bring it back because they know who you are. So guns circulate. They're already there. There's not at least in our city, I know in Chicago, in Illinois, may have very, very tough laws. We don't in Pennsylvania. We have some of the weakest laws in the United States of America. And so in places where you have tough laws, I mean, they may be crazy, but they're not totally stupid. They go across the county line, buy whatever weapons they buy in a weaker law state, and bring them back and engage in their activity, which is why we need federal legislation covering the entire United States of America. That's what we need. And straw purchasers, I mean, the people involved in that particular business and in many instances, it could be a spouse, it could be a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever the case may be. The person knows that they can't buy weapons themselves. They go have a friend go do it. That person is engaged in criminal activity as far as I'm concerned. They should have the hammer come down on them as well. And lastly, you need minimum sentences for people who walk around with unlicensed weapons. If you look to New York, and commend Governor Cuomo for what he did yesterday, but in New York City, a very famous athlete a few years ago, walking around with his own weapon, unlicensed, shot himself in the leg and did 2 years in prison. This is serious business. We have too many young people, too many teens with too great of access to these weapons, and no one seems to care whether or not they have them or not. Those are illegal guns that should not be on our streets, and we need to step up in law enforcement activity and snatch those illegal guns off the streets of America. All of this conversation, and I had one last night with someone who clearly needs a serious background check herself, this notion that somehow, after 236 years, created in the city of Philadelphia, that somehow the government is going to do something that causes everyone to be armed, that we're marching down the street, coming after guns, is a whole lot of nonsense. And people who are not dealing in the reality of what I and the chief and many others face on a daily basis. We have real jobs with real challenges and real responsibilities trying to make our folks safe. We need to cut out the nonsense and have serious conversation about these issues, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, very much. Our next group of five, and we'd ask that people try to hear the 1 minute that my co-chair has indicated committee assignments may be based on adherence to that, is the first is Ms. Barbara Lee from California. Then Ms. Lujan Grisham, Mr. Hank Johnson, Ms. Susan Davis, Ms. David Scott. And let me just also say to the witnesses, when you're responding to this group of five, if you'd like to comment on the earlier questions, please feel free to do so.
Barbara Lee.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank the panel for your extraordinary testimony. And also, my heartfelt condolences go to the families of your loved ones and to the entire Newtown community. My constituents in my district, especially, I'm from Oakland, California, send their thoughts and their prayers also to you. In many ways, part of the community which I represent has been and continues to be a war zone. 15 of my constituents were shot just last week. Chief Knight, could you just please give us an idea of what cities and police officers and mayors confront in terms of daily gun violence?
Okay, and next is Ms. Lujan Grisham.
Thank you. I too want to add my appreciation for the incredibly touching and courageous remarks today. I can tell you that I have renewed resolve because of your courage and dedication and compassion, and recognize that this is the day to commit from this day forward that we need comprehensive federal reform so that we're doing something meaningful about the gun violence in this country. And in fact, I come from a district in New Mexico where we have significant gun violence and tragedy. And many of the questions I would have asked have been asked today, and so I have a new question, which is, in the aftermath of this incredibly horrific tragedy in Newtown, and notwithstanding that, or I want to make sure I recognize that there have been others, what can we do in Congress today to help the healing of Newtown and make sure that we have continued support for those families and your community, Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. Mr. Hank Johnson.
Thank you. My condolences to Drs. Robinson and Nottingham, and also to the representatives from the Virginia shooting. My sincere condolences. We live in a culture of violence. The question is, how do we change from a culture of violence into a culture of education and a culture of peacefulness? It takes money. We here in Congress have that ability. Preventing mass shootings by way of banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, certainly something that we should do. We need to get at the issue of violence that affects us with respect to handguns used primarily in inner-city areas to kill people. I'm not advocating for a ban on handguns, don't get me wrong, but I will say we need to address the issue of violence in our culture. And I'd like to know what kinds of resources are available to help students and to help people in the community, adults who have emotional or mental disorders, and whether or not we need to put more resources into that area.
Thank you, Hank. Susan Davis.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, for your amazing testimony. I want to just follow up on the mental health question as well, because I don't know if you could identify, and perhaps Chief Knight, immediate steps that cities and schools can take to identify potentially dangerous individuals. We know that many people who would benefit from mental health treatment are actually incarcerated because there's no other place for them to go. And on the other hand, California, for one, has had a civil commitment standard procedure for involuntary commitments, and I wonder whether you think that's an important thing to look at as we look at options that communities would have.
Thank you. David Scott.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Robinson, I'd like to direct this question to you. The National Rifle Association has said that the best way in response to what happened at your school in Newtown was to arm the teachers, put armed personnel in each of the schools. I'd like to get your response. How would you respond to the NRA on that? And then secondly, why you feel strongly that a large part of the answer to this is to deal with these weapons of mass destruction, as we call them, with these high-capacity weapons. Those 2 points, please.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your patience. A wide variety of questions we'd ask our panelists to answer. Remember, if you'd like to comment on something, but Rosa, did you?
No, I was just going to say that I was going to go to Dr. Robinson.
Dr.
because
Robinson
she too has
first,
to
yes. We'll go
leave
that
for an
in that order.
airplane.
Thank you. Representative Grisham, thank you for your question. It's a sensitive question. We realize now, as we're in the midst of this and sort of looking back, there are phases of this, dealing with this trauma. If I would name this, I'd call this the start of a recovery. It's still painful. Mental health is a big piece. Part of what I've come to realize is when you have lost your whole sense of safety, that you start to look for things that are concrete and give you visible signs of safety. Parents are looking to see that the police are out at the street. They want to make sure there's police, a car out there and police in the building. Parents are coming in demanding that there be SROs in all of our elementary schools, which we didn't have. People seem to need that. Some of my teachers are saying, I need escape ladders in the room, and I need to have the door changed, and I need new locks. And they're creating lots of things, lists of things that they need to have to feel safe because they've lost their personal sense of safety. So Congress could take a real critical look at those unique situations that happen in these traumatic events that, Arizona or wherever. People go through these processes, and they're in different places, and there's a lot of grieving, and the mental health support is very necessary, and we do a great job of bringing in traumatic experts, counseling and so forth, and then they go away. And I think my people need support for a long time. And I don't think that when these people go away, they start talking about a transition plan to me, and I said, no, stop. We can't talk transition. We are not there. So we need more long-term kinds of support when a traumatic incident occurs. And that's in mental health, and that's also with those visible signs of security so that we can keep going. Representative Scott, your question on NRA arming teachers. I come from a military family. My dad was career military. My husband was a Navy pilot. We don't keep guns. You know, I have great respect for guns. My dad used to take me on his old ranch in New Mexico and teach me how to shoot. I have great respect for him. But if you remember what the chief said a little while ago, he said it takes a great deal of training for a police officer to shoot a weapon in action. Teachers are teachers, and if you think of elementary teachers just love kids. They're not going to go packing and sit on the floor in the rug and read to the kids with a gun at their hip. There was some very insensitive individual who will go unnamed that immediately after this, and I did not watch TV after this, made some claim that if Dawn Hawksprung had just had a weapon in her desk, she could have taken care of it. Number one, she wasn't at her desk, and no good principal is. So that means she'd have to be carrying it as she walked around. And what is this athletic individual who shot himself in the foot? How many little kids could get injured with inexperienced elementary teachers walking around with guns? It's not even logical. Now, my people do tell me they need to see right now, and I don't know if that's long-term, but right now they need to see armed policemen. And they want people who are trained and know how to use, they want to see them in the schools. And I think that's that loss of security, and I think that's important, that at least temporarily we be able to accommodate that. Your third part of your question had to do with high capacity. He shot every one of these little 6-year-olds 3 to 11 times. That wasn't necessary. And we could, had he had a single shot or you know, I know nothing about it, but a gun that could not, and all that ammunition, maybe Dawn and the people coming out could have stopped him. You know, they were determined. They didn't have a chance with a semi-automatic weapon. And little 6-year-old bodies having a chance. So that's the depth of my feeling. Did I miss anyone? All right.
Ms. Nottingham, did you have a comment? And then we'll go to the chief.
I'd just like to echo the idea that people need support after mass shootings or after any major tragedy for a long time. There is not a quick recovery, and that should be understood and recognized. Secondly, to address just one aspect of the idea of moving to a culture of education rather than a culture of violence. One of the things that we've been working on in Tucson through the Fund for Civility, Respect, and Understanding is anti-bullying programs in schools, because where we learn about violence, we model violence, children learn very young. And if we're going to address this through an educational aspect, then we should look at additional support for anti-bullying activities in our schools.
From my worldview, some of these overlap. So I'm not necessarily going to be surgical, but I'm going to answer, I think, a lot of these questions. Firstly, and she's left, but asked about funding. Yes, please, we do. And here's a number of ways that we use it, but specifically we're talking about school resource officers. In my city, a city of 25,000, the lion's share of the public schools with our district are in my city, and I have private schools, 3. Because of funding and what it is in today's world and the economy and education, we know how they're strapped. I had 4 SROs at one time. I now have 1. And that's not a desired situation by the school or by my department. So yes to the funding piece. And to the mental health piece and SROs and getting on it early. They're in there, they're with the kids, they know the kids. They even know when they don't look right. You're having a bad day today. What's going on? And they have friendships and they talk, and somebody else will say, have you seen his Facebook page? Or I am being taken down, bullied in Facebook, and all these things that lead us to mental health issues. And in regard to mental health issues, today the officer on the street gets called because someone is having an episode of some nature. And maybe a family member calls, or maybe a coworker calls, or maybe they're just out and about having some sort of episode. The officer comes, evaluates, and determines that, you know, something is going on here, and this person needs to be seen. Now, they've committed no crime a lot of the time, but you can't leave. So they, in Minnesota, and I think this is similar throughout our country, execute what's called a 72-hour hold. A lot of people think, oh, good. Situation is resolved for 72 hours at least. This individual is going to be receiving some sort of care and diagnosis that will determine what is the next step. But it's not true. The 72-hour hold only gives the authority to say, whether you want to or not, you are going to have to come with me or with this paramedic crew, and you're going to this hospital. Upon arrival, often, because it's not acute or the history is not known, a host of legitimate reasons, the ER physician or whomever is seeing that person releases them right then, and they're out they go. So yes, that's a problem. And you're right. My peers will tell you, jails have become de facto institutions because a lot of these people then immediately, some sort of crime happens, or if they're out, something will, and so now they're in jail. And do we think they're getting treated there? We know they're not. So I hope that goes to your question. To the question about...
Chief, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? I know that Dr. Robinson is going to catch an airplane, and again, we want to say thank you to you. Our hearts, our thoughts, our prayers are with you and the Newtown community, and we will do what we need to do. Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Sorry, Chief.
No,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. So to the question about someone legally owns a weapon, but then another person somehow gets their hands on it, a family member or whatever the situation. Yes, that happens. We know that happens. But there should be, along with reporting lost or stolen weapons, there should be legislation, I think, that requires the safe storage and the separation of weapons and ammunition. So they're not available to just anyone who might come upon them. And just so you know, as a footnote, it wasn't that long ago that Smith & Wesson was giving gun locks out with their weapons. And they were vilified by the industry. And guess what they stopped doing? It's a business decision. Folks, giving gun locks, and it was a prudent business decision to stop it. Now, where's the sanity in that? It doesn't exist. Of course it doesn't. You know, in regard to the daily violence that we see it. And it's, fortunately, in my city, very few murders, but we have a lot of suicide. We have a lot of accidents. In fact, in the past 12 months, we've had 4 people who have gone through the permitting process shoot themselves. And they're accidents. 2 of them were demonstrating the weapon was unloaded. And so we're dealing with gun violence all the time. And again, which doesn't make the news, is my officers are taking guns off of people all the time. Because nothing happened, thank God. Well, it's not a newsworthy item. And here's a little bit of Scott Knight history. And my peers will tell you this across the country. I started in 1976. At that time, the officer had a sidearm. It was a revolver. And in the car, if needed, was a shotgun. It's typically a 12-gauge. And that was the weapon to go to if it really got heavy. Well, today, over time, we went from that shotgun because, folks, it wasn't adequate. It was no longer adequate for the threats the officer was facing on the streets. And we moved to an MP5 9mm carbine rifle because, well, now we're equal. We're leveling the field just a little bit. We're not getting ahead. We're leveling the field here just a little bit. Today my officers have AR-15s in their cars. Now, do you think I'm doing this because I want to? Do you think I got a lot of money? Do you think it's sporting? I'm doing it because I am forced to provide my officers the tools they need to keep you, my family, my community, and themselves safe. It's not simply because it's a new, sexy weapon that we need to acquire. So that goes, I hope that goes to your question. And I hope I touched on all those questions.
Okay, thank you. This is the last tranche of questions here, and Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas, Anita Lowy from New York, Gwen Moore. Where's Gwen? Oh, there you are. I'm sorry, Gwen, didn't see you. Congressman Gwen Moore and Congressman Vesey. Did he? He may have left. Okay. So, Ms. Jackson Lee, Ms. Lowy, and Ms. Moore. 1 minute.
Let me acknowledge to Dr. Nottingham our deepest sympathy but respect for such a young man and such a hero to your son. Certainly to the tragedy that we've witnessed in Newtown and elsewhere, to Chief. I also want to acknowledge two people in the room who experienced gun violence, in Ron Davis and Lucia Macbeth, who lost their son, Jordan Russell Davis, to gun violence. I come from Texas, Chief, and I'm going to hold this up. The headline says, "At top of gun world," because I want everyone to know what you've just said and what many have said. We're not after people's guns. The store's name is Houston Armory, and the headline says that they're strictly controlled by the United States government. Not only that, someone said, well, suppose someone breaks in to take their guns. And they said, because they are in a vault. Tell me about being outgunned as a police officer and the importance of storing and securing guns. You mentioned it earlier, but storing and securing guns in people's homes, which I think is enormously crucial.
Ms. Lowy.
Thank you very much. And I particularly want to thank Dr. Nottingham as a mother and a grandmother. I can't imagine sitting next to my friend, Rep. Ron Barber, the pain you feel. I don't have any questions. I just want to ask for your help and all those who are listening today. We all have been listening to the recent polls. 88% of American people support closing the gun show loophole. 76% support universal background checks. 65% support banning high-capacity magazines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we've heard your wisdom today, and I just hope we can work together to use the American people to get legislation passed through both the Senate and the House. New York passed tough legislation just this week. We can do it with your help, and I thank you for appearing here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Moore?
Thank you so much. I join so many others in awe of you who have turned your pain into some actionable plans for curtailing this violence. I just don't know that I could do it. And so I really appreciate your appearing to help us sort through these things. I think part of what makes all of us feel so helpless is because how do you prepare when you're in a sleepy little town like Newtown, Connecticut, anticipating that someone will come in and shoot 26 people? You just don't necessarily prepare for that as you might think of some big city where that might happen. But I'm talking about domestic violence now. We know that every single day there's going to be some woman who is going to be killed because there are restraining orders that are put out there, and a woman whose spouse has a firearm is 5 times more likely to be killed. Now, we have federal laws prohibiting misdemeanor or felony, folks with felonies from having a firearm, but what do you think? I have a bill. What do you think, Chief, of maybe a grant program we could give to the states to, number one, sort of align their domestic violence laws and identifying who these people are with federal law,
and to give them grants so that as soon as that restraining order is put down, number one, they seize those firearms from them right that day. You know, no need to go to a psychiatrist, nothing. If you got a restraining order, we get your firearms that day, and until the judge lifts that order at some point, and that that it be put into the NCIS immediately, so that you can't get
Thank
another
you.
gun. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Barr, a minute comment question.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. I have a question with regard to mental health services and identifying people with mental health needs. But before I did, I want to correct something I've been saying for a few days that is now incorrect. I was saying that those of us who were shot on January 8th were shot in 45 seconds. I learned yesterday from the U.S. Attorney that 33 bullets were discharged in 19 seconds. And I think it just emphasizes all the more the need to do something about high-capacity magazines. My question to you about mental health, we have a bill in play that hopefully will provide training to first responders and educators. Police Chief and Emily, if you will, what more can we do to provide good information, practical information to those who might come into contact with folks with mental illness so that we can help get them the treatment that they need and possibly prevent these kinds of tragedies?
And I'll ask our to respond.
Going to the question about gun storage, and particularly in the home venue. I think one of the issues, this is a personal opinion, but tested in the field, if you will, our country has a solid hunting and sporting tradition, but it was waning. And we have a lot of people now with guns that didn't grow up in such traditions and cultures, and frankly, they don't hunt. And with that comes the lack of respect for a weapon, first of all.
Yes.
Secondly, this idea, and we see it all the time, of guns unsecured, loaded, in a home, under a pillow, in the nightstand, on top of the refrigerator, wherever it is that anyone can come along, especially a child, and pick up. Frankly, we need legislation that makes it a crime. And we could say, after the fact, it's been through via social services and those avenues, unsafe environment and those kinds of things, but is that really getting at the particular issue? I don't think it does. And sometimes they have to be a little creative to do that. In regard to domestic violence, absolutely. And here's what we could do with that. First of all, and forgive me for saying the obvious, but NICS, creates, it's a wonderful thing. I'm sorry, NCIC. It's a wonderful, well, they're both wonderful things, but NCIC is a wonderful thing, but anything with a serial number goes in there too, like a toaster, if you have one, right? So it's not necessarily a go-to database to get what we want to get at here. I think that you're right on, and I think that those people should go into the NICS system right away. And I think that what we need is then funding for crisis teams. Because a lot of times, and even when guns, and often is the case, are not involved, but someone needs some help, and an officer rolls up at 3 in the morning, and they are very limited in the resources that are available to them. If there is funding for properly trained crisis intervention people, there we go. Now we got something. Now it is the mental health ER, if you will, and the officer doesn't have to try and be creative or drive away, God forbid, because there's nothing they can do. And I'm sorry, was there another question that
While he's thinking, I just want to add one thing, and I'm not an expert in mental health, but I do just want to say that in any comprehensive package, including appropriate funding for increased access to mental health services and increased mental health services is absolutely crucial. We don't want to have to solve our problems by tackling a shooter after they've run out of bullets in a high-capacity magazine. What we want to do is stop them from ever feeling the need to pick up that gun. And so if we can include mental health in a comprehensive package, I think it's absolutely crucial.
Let me say thank you, and I want to ask each of you if you have some closing remarks you want to make. A startling statistic, Ms. Nottingham, that I just found out is that 67% of adults, 80% of our children who have mental health issues are not being treated for those issues. I had to look over and over again because I thought the numbers were so staggering that no one would believe me, and we've got the citation on it as well. Let me just ask you if you have any closing remarks, and maybe before I turn it over to the leader.
Thank you for listening to us, and stay the course.
I would like to say this. Thank you. You know, I have, over the years, met with a lot of you, and I know where your hearts are. I know where your hearts are, and I thank you. Thank you. And what a great day this was, leaving the White House and coming to this, and thank you. I would say this. There are those who say that the gun lobby has caused great fear among your colleagues, and maybe they would rather do something, but because of this fear, they all go with the gun lobby. I would like to just suggest this. For that individual, not you folks, but for that individual who's struggling with that fear, that's not fear. That's inconvenience. That's maybe a little heartburn. Fear. Fear is what went through the hearts and minds of those 20 first graders in Connecticut. That's fear, ladies and gentlemen. And that is a suggestion that people should be afraid of the gun lobby, when in fact you know America is behind you on the gun background checks and all these other issues. How is that fear? It is just becoming educated. Thank you.
Madam Leader.
Thank you very much. I thank you, Congresswoman DeLauro and Congressman Rob Andrews, the co-chairs of the Steering and Policy Committee. I thank all of our colleagues. This is the biggest show of members that we have had for any hearing by far. And I might add, there's an overflow room of folks who have been listening to the proceedings. Most of all, I thank our witnesses for sharing their stories, their experience. You honor us with your generosity of spirit and time to be with us, because I know you have big demands, especially at this time for your opinions. I did want this, as I mentioned earlier, is a call to action. Gun violence prevention, a call to action. So I'm going to yield my time to the gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson, because he has the responsibility to lead us into action legislatively here. Once again, Chief Knight, Dr. Nottingham, thank you so much for honoring us with your presence.
Thank you, Madam Leader and chairs, for holding today's hearing. And thank you for allowing me to help construct sensible gun laws that will help to prevent gun violence. Nothing said today is earth-shattering. Nothing said today is going to take anybody's guns. Nothing today is going to threaten any hunters or any gun collectors. People came forward today and called for background checks, and I don't know how anyone could be against that. Everybody wants to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. If you don't have background checks, you can't do it. That's right. The whole idea of assault magazines, people coming with 30 shells in their magazines, 20, even 15 shells in their magazine. As I've already said, I'm a hunter. The federal law restricts the number of shells I can put in my shotgun when I go duck hunting.
Right.
No law restricts the number of shells somebody can put in an assault magazine to go out and do whatever types of misdeeds that they want to do. Enforcing the existing laws, that's, what do they say, a no-brainer. Enhance school security, fixing the holes in our mental health system, all important things, all things that we have to do. And the leader's right, it is a call to action, and it's time to act. It's time that responsible gun owners stand hand in hand with a passionate and compassionate Congress to make sure that we make our streets safe. And it's something we can do, and the time to act is now. So thank you all very, very much.
I think it's important to note to our witnesses that For the course of the hearing, as you know, scores of members were here, but our distinguished majority Democratic whip has been with us the entire time, as has our distinguished ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. So we're very honored by your presence and as tribute to you.
If I can say, I wasn't asked whether I had any questions, but I was going to answer. I have no questions. But I have unbelievable respect and admiration for your courage and insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you'll be able to see this House Democratic Steering Committee meeting again in our video library shortly at cspan.org. We'll also have it later in our program schedule. President Obama earlier today